Hello, everyone. I'm thrilled to have the man with the dare, Mike Whitney. He broke a billion hearts in January 1992 when he caught the catch of Sachin Tendulkar and stole the match from India's grasp. How are you doing, Mike? We've still not forgotten you for that. Hope you're doing well.
Thank you, Chandra. It's lovely to be with you, mate. Look, it's a very interesting time in my life, actually. In Australia here, we're seriously locked down, as pretty much around the world. And at the end of last year, actually, my 26-year television career came to a very immediate halt. The show that I'd hosted on the Seven Network here in Australia called Sydney Weekender was unceremoniously axed. So I'd always promised myself when the television was over and I was sort of going to step back a little bit from public life, that I'd shave my head and I'd grow a beard. Now, you would remember me with the curly locks and all that sort of stuff. And I've always had a hairdo like that. And this is the first time and the shortest my hair has ever been. So it's a big crossroads for me. I'm not sure what's going to happen work-wise or television-wise with me. I've just turned 61 and maybe it's time to retire and do a little bit of cricket. I'd love to do some cricket here in Australia. The IPL, something like that would be fantastic. So besides all that, I'm going fantastic.
Mike, let's start at the beginning. You have always been called Big Roy or Crazy, and you were mentored by Allan Davidson. What is all that about?
I grew up in a suburb in Sydney, which just sits behind a place called Maroubra Beach, where I live now, called Matraville. And Matraville's become quite famous because David Warner's from Matraville as well. And before me, there was another test cricketer called Alan Turner, who opened the batting for Australia, left-handed, played about 15 tests in the late 70s. He, in fact, became my first grade captain when I started playing first grade at my club, Randwick. So it was a pretty wild and woolly place to grow up, let me tell you. I mean, it was some very low socioeconomic areas around Matraville. It was pretty rough. And, I was pretty crazy growing up. And when I first started playing club cricket, I was, again, just into them and had come more from a rugby league background. My chosen sport was really rugby league, and I got into cricket a little bit late and then found I fell in love with cricket very quickly and wanted to play more cricket. So I had this sort of rugby league mentality playing cricket, and that's really not, they're worlds apart. I mean, you can't touch people on the cricket field. Rugby league's a very physical sport. So I had to sort of temper that down. And I remember getting in the New South Wales team in about my second or third season. I'd matured a lot. I really fell in love with the game, and I really started to understand the nuances of playing first-class cricket and wanted to play test cricket. And Greg Matthews, the great Mo Matthews, said to me one day in the dressing room, "You're not crazy anymore. You're Big Roy." Now, Big Roy is my middle name. And that was also my father's name. He was Roy Whitney, and he passed away when I was 16. And he was sort of Big Roy. So I just took the mantle off my dad, and ever from that have been known as Big Roy. Yeah.
And Allan Davidson?
Well, when I got in the New South Wales cricket team in 1980, there wasn't a lot of left arm, fast medium bowlers around. Jeff Dimmick had played for Australia. There was a couple playing in Shield cricket. And it's a whole different thing. I mean, bowling right hand, the angles are just completely different. The field setting's completely different. I didn't really get that until I started playing in a high level of cricket. Luckily for me, the great Allan Davidson was the president of the New South Wales Cricket Association right through my whole 14-year career. And he took me under his wing, one of the greats of all time. I mean, his bowling record and his batting record, and he was one of the great all-rounders of all time, but his left-arm bowling record is just amazing. And he was fantastic to me, and he taught me so much. He was never boisterous or demanding. He always used to sit next to me and say, "I thought you bowled really well today, but have you ever thought about this? Not you should be doing this. Have you ever thought about this? And this is what I used to do." And I'd move my feet around the crease and just change the angle. And he'd just leave me with those little beautiful pearls of wisdom. And if I didn't actually get it, I could go back to him and ask him. And look, he came in the dressing room every day for a very short period of time. He could have stayed in there forever. I mean, it's the great A.K. Davidson. but he knew that that was the players' realm after the game. So he'd come in as the president, say hello to everybody, sit down with Steve Waugh for 5 minutes, talk about how he batted, or Mark Taylor or Greg Matthews, and then he'd come and sit with me and pat me on the knee and say what I just said. I thought you bowled really well today, but in that spell, I thought you could have, you know, had you thought about doing this to that particular batsman? And look, Davo's still alive now, but getting very frail. But I call him from time to time and still thank him greatly for all the information he gave me and how wonderful he was to all of us. Just a great man.
You go there from there to England to play club cricket in 1981, and then your life changes. Tell us something about that journey from being a club cricketer in England to being a test cricketer, receiving a call, thinking that it's a prank. And the whole journey itself is interesting because you were going to play club cricket for £65 a week, and then you go in as a replacement for Mike Proctor. You're promised a car by Gloucestershire, $700 a week, and $300 for each one-day game. And you play a one-day game which is watched by Kim Hughes. Pounds. Yeah. and you're watched playing by Kim Hughes and the guys. Tell us about that whole thing, how it worked out.
I got into the New South Wales team in 1980-81 and played 4 games. One of those was a tour match against New Zealand and 3 Sheffield Shield games, which was fantastic. For the rest of the time, I was 12th man. That gave me a good opportunity to be with Len Pascoe and Jeff Lawson and Doug Walters. I was playing with Doug Walters. Dougie was my hero. And here I am in the dressing room as a 21-year-old, and Doug was, well, it happened to be his last season, but he's sitting there. I couldn't stop like looking at him thinking, is this for real? And Rick McCosker and John Dyson and Ian Davis and Trevor Chappell and Graham Beard and Steve Rickson. I mean, this fantastic team. So being in the dressing room and being the 12th, I got to feel like I got to know them a little better. And you're the young guy in the team. You're running drinks out. You're picking their bags up, all that stuff. But it was a great apprenticeship. But a lot of guys, and even guys I played club cricket with in Sydney, had gone to England to play that England off-season. And it's perfect for us. Our season finishes, their season starts, their season finishes, you come home, we go straight into our next season. So a few guys had played at a club called Fleetwood up in the Northern League in Lancashire. So I got in contact with them. I signed up £65 a week. They paid half my airfare. I was boarding with an elderly couple. But it was great. And I'd done a little bit of travelling before that, and I really wanted to go to England and play cricket. And look, I'm still friends with those people. Now, that was 1981. When I go to England, I would never go to England and not go to Fleetwood and see those people. So about a third of the way through the season, I get a call from a friend of mine who's playing on a scholarship at Gloucestershire, a guy called Greg Geese, who I was in the New South Wales squad with. And he said that Mike Proctor and Brian Brain, who was a right-arm seamer who had taken 1,800 first-class wickets, both were injured and they were looking for a quick to fill in. And I mentioned to them that you were playing in Fleetwood. So we got in contact and I asked the people at Fleetwood and they said, well, you can't play when you've got to play for us. But if there's a 3-day game during the week or a John Player League game on a Sunday, we're happy to let you go. So I went down for a trial at Gloucester. That was amazing, just being at a county ground and, you know, the tradition and David Graveney and Mike Proctor, Zahir Abbas, Sadiq Mohammed, they were all there. All these guys that had played a lot of cricket, a lot of international cricket. So they signed me up and I played a couple of games for them and 3 or 4 John Player League games. And one of those games, the Australian team was touring in the 81 Ashes, which became known as Botham's Ashes at the end of it. And they'd watch one of these one-day games I'd played, which I think were 45 over games. They weren't 50 over games. And I'd taken 3 or 4 for 30, and a couple of those guys were ex-test players and bowled really well. So I'm ready, got called, went back to Fleetwood. Gloucestershire's playing the next week at Cheltenham against Hampshire, who had Malcolm Marshall and Gordon Greenwich playing for them. So it was going to be fun whether we batted or bowled. We lost the toss and we're batting. Malcolm's got like 4 for 20. and we're all padded up. I'm batting last. We're all padded up because we look like Malcolm's going to go through the whole side. And the phone came out, and they said, "This is a phone call for you, Mr. Whitney." So I picked the phone up, and this bloke went, "There, I'm the manager of the Australian cricket team, and you've been picked to play for Australia." And I thought it was a mate of mine because we'd heard on the press that Lawson and Hogg were both injured, and they might have needed a third seamer to go into this game. So I told this bloke, I can't say what I told him, but and hung the phone up. 2 minutes later, it rang back, and it was Fred Bennett, the manager of the Australian cricket team. And I apologised profusely to him for telling him that, because I thought it was a mate of mine. He said, "Get in the car, drive up to Manchester to the Grand Hotel, come up to room 271 and meet me there as soon as you come." So Malcolm's taken another 2 wickets by this stage. So I got them pads off real quick, let me tell you. So I didn't want to go out there and bat against Marshall. Got in the car, drove to Manchester, went up to this room and knocked on the door. And there was Fred Bennett and Kim Hughes. And they said, I'd only met Kim briefly at a Sheffield Shield match when I was 12th man. You're going to play tomorrow and you're going to bowl in the 5th test at Old Trafford, and you're going to bowl first change after Dennis Lilly and Terry Alderman take the new ball. Well, by that stage, this is my 7th first-class match, and I'm just trying to compute what he's just said. And at the same time, which is the way it was done in those days, dear old Fred Bennett's got 2 short sleeve jumpers and a long sleever. There's your jumpers and there's your fielding hat. And this is how I got my baggy green. There's your baggy green. Just handed it to me in the manager's dressing. They present it in front of the crowd now and all this sort of stuff. So I got all this gear, go up to the room and meet us downstairs at 6 o'clock because we're going to have an interview and release the fact that you'll be Australia's 313th Test cricketer tomorrow. So I went up to the room, and of course, you're rooming with someone in those days, and the room's got all this gear in it. And I had a look on this particular beautifully crafted leather bag, and it had DK Lilly written on it. Now, in 1981, I mean, Dennis played till 1985, but 1981, mate, he was the king. I mean, he was another hero of mine. I'd met him briefly once, and I'm rooming with him. And the next minute, he walked in the room, and Chandresh fair income, I stood at attention. I just didn't know what to do. I stood at attention, and he went, "No, it's all right, it's all right." And he was fantastic to me. We're still great friends, but the way he nurtured me through that game, and I played in the next test, the 6th test at the Oval, again, with him and Terry Alderman opening the bowling, and he was just fantastic, mate. I can't ever thank him enough for how he embraced the situation that I was in, dropped a few gems on me. You know, look, this is what we expect, and you're playing for Australia because you're in the best 11 that's available, and here's your chance. And it was just amazing, mate. But look, I played with Rod Marsh and Kim Hughes, Graham Yallop. I mean, all these guys that were just heroes, and there you're in the dressing room with them, and you don't know what to say, and you just want to be. It was just amazing. So that, you're right, Chandresh, that changed my life. I went back to I actually, when the Ashes left, I went back and played one last game for Gloucester at Manchester against Lancashire, and then went back to Fleetwood and finished my contractual agreements there for a couple of weeks, and then came back to Australia. And I'd left Australia as someone who'd played 4 first-class matches and was really trying to forge ahead in his cricket career, and came back as a Test cricketer. And it changed my life dramatically from that moment on.
And it's interesting that that dramatic 1981, very soon you were in demand, and you were much in demand for being in commercials. And then you had the famous beer commercial where you had to hit the big bird, Joel Garner, for a boundary, and you couldn't hit him for a boundary. And these batting skills of yours saved somebody's Test captaincy, and you couldn't hit Joel Garner for a boundary.
Oh, that was a long time later. We'll talk about that later when I saved the Test captaincy. But we got back from England, and one of my teammates at New South Wales, Dirk Wellham, had made his Test debut in the 6th test and got 100 on debut. And we were the same age, Dirk. We knew each other really well. When we got back to Australia, Tui's was the major sponsor of New South Wales Cricket, the beer company. And they wanted to use me and Dirk. And for some reason, they changed their mind. And used Steve Rickson, who was actually working for Tooheys. So the ad was that, yeah, I come out batting customary number 11 and I need 3 runs off the last delivery that Joel Garner's going to bowl. And it was set up on this park in Adelaide, and it wasn't really a cricket wicket. And Joel was doing the very best he could to try and help me out, knowing that I had a batting average of like 1.3 at the time or something. It was just around 1. And in the end, he'd bowled for about an hour trying to pitch these half volleys up, and I got a couple right and missed a few and didn't get it right in the angle that they needed. And Joel went like this: "I've had enough of the bowling. My arm is 8 foot long. I bowled for 3 hours nonstop, and I'm going to stand behind Whit, and he's going to play the shot, and I'm going to throw the ball out to the boundary." And that's what happened. And with a little bit of clever cutting of the footage, it looks like I've hit the ball out to the boundary, but I didn't hit it. Joel threw it out there eventually. So when I see the big bird, we always have a laugh about that. And as people could attest to my batting, well, there was not too many that drove Joel Garner through the covers anyway. So it was a big ask anyway, you know.
You made your test debut in 81, 80, and then for 6 years, you didn't play any test cricket. I was just reading one of the old newspapers of Canberra Times in 87. You were again brought back in 87 against New Zealand as a standby for Merv Hughes and Bruce Reid because both of them were injured. But by then, I read that you had gone mountain climbing and visited 40 or more countries, and you'd been to see the wild beauty of Africa, Tanzania's Mount Kilimanjaro. You've been to India and in Kashmir as well, in India, and then
Srinagar. Srinagar
surf,
and Gulmarg,
surfing in Bali and Hawaii. And after all that, you're called back as a standby, and then you do something remarkable. Has Allan Border ever thanked you? Has he ever taken you out for a meal after all those years as a gift?
No, he's never taken me out for a meal, but when I was, I don't drink alcohol anymore, but he certainly bought me a couple of beers going back 25 years ago and has thanked me a few times. Just put the arm round and said, "Thanks for that, mate." That was the start of his captaincy career. He'd been a captain for a couple of years, but I'd always thought Allan was a bit of a standard captain. He wasn't very, in those first couple of years, not that he wasn't thoughtful, but, you know, you play with some captains like Steve Waugh and they'll bring someone into a really unusual fielding position or make a bowling change there. Allan sort of had a standard run until 1989. We won that thing in 87, but a couple of years went by. When 89, I remember when he went Captain Grumpy and he wasn't going to talk, and we won the Ashes 4-0. And that was when he just exploded and used everything he knew. But 87 was big. And I had done all those things in between that time. I'd had a couple of knee surgeries and had a little bit of time out the game and thought that I would go and travel and see the world. When I was a young teenager, I did an apprenticeship at Qantas as a ground engineer. So I'm an aviation maintenance engineer as a trade. And of course, when you work for an airline, you can go away for 10%. So this really encouraged me to fly. So when I worked for Qantas, I did a fair bit of traveling, and that just encouraged me to want to go and see every place that I could, try and understand why those people in that country were like that. Why did they speak that language? What was their history? And the place, the earth, is just such a beautiful, amazing place. And I mentioned a couple of places there. I went and lived on a houseboat in Kashmir, in Srinagar, for weeks, and then went up to Gulmarg in the mountains and climbed a mountain up there called Alpatha, where you can sort of walk up this pretty hairy trail, but you get up the top of the mountain and can just walk over the back. And there was a frozen lake down over the back and these wild sort of antelopes running around there. And Kashmir is just such a beautiful, India's a beautiful place, mate. Now, India is just a fascinating place. I've been to India 20 times now, and it still takes me a day to, oh, that's right. It's a lot of people here, and you get into that Indian rhythm of urgency and a lot of people around and just, and you know, day one, it's chaotic. And by day three, you're used to it again. And I just get absorbed into the whole thing. So I love that. And Africa, again, was oh, just mind-blowing. It was just a wonderful time in those early to mid-'80s to be able to go and travel. There wasn't as many restrictions and you could freely go most places, and there was a lot of people traveling. You'd get on the Travellers Road, you'd meet other people from Australia or England or wherever, Indian people, wherever it may have been, and that was great. But yeah, I still always played cricket, and to get picked in that 87 game, it was because of injury, but I never thought that even after the match that I'd still be talking about that game all these years down the track. And as the time's gone on, that game has gained more significance. And, Richard is now Sir Richard Hadlee. And, there's a beautiful story about the ball from that match, which he'd taken a 5 for in both innings. And when I'd blocked him out, he'd taken 5 with that game. And Ian Smith gave me that ball. And I had it for 28 years, and I finally gave it back to him in 2015. And Sir Richard Hadlee cried when I handed him this ball. Out of his 32 5-wicket hauls, this was the only ball that he didn't have. And he'd asked me about it over the years. And prior to the World Cup final in Melbourne in 2015, Australia played New Zealand. There was a big dinner there, and a few people knew this story. And they said, "Why don't you bring the ball?" Because I'd said, "Oh, yeah, I'll give it back to you one day." So I took the ball down and presented it to him, and Sir Ian Botham was there, Sir Viv Richards, everybody was at this dinner. And he cried when he took this ball and he put it in the old outswinger straight away, and he had a tear running down his face over a cricket ball, which shows you what a beautiful game we have and how emotional and how attached we are to it.
And Mike, and saving the test match, what was the reaction of Allan Border and Bob Simpson and the guys? There's this famous story that, Allan said that, get these 20 runs or don't get out. What was that all about? Because you were in with a chance to win the test match as well.
I think, I think we needed 30, maybe 30 odd. Craig McDermott had been in for, 25, 30 minutes with Tony Dottermaid, who made his debut in that test match and scored a 50 and took 6 for. So he had a great debut, and we were hoping Dotters in the second innings was going to scratch around and scrape some more runs, but he got out. They'd taken the second new ball. Richard was bowling, and Danny Morrison, who was a good quick bowler from the other end. Danny, he was quite sharp, Danny. I don't think people really think that he was up there with pace, but he was young then and fresh and bowled good pace, and the great Richard at the other end. And then Dotters got out. I was actually packed, ready to go to Perth to play in a one-day series, which was starting in 3 or 4 days' time, and had to unpack the gear and get changed. And I remember Allan standing at the door, and he didn't say anything, but he just sort of tapped me on the shoulder, and that look on his face, "Oh, please, mate." Now, the story about are we going to get the runs or block it out is I walked out into the middle, and Craig McDermott actually thumped me in the chest and said, "We can get the runs." And I went, "No, we can't. I've got a batting average of 2. Like, come on, man." We had just shy of 5 overs, I think, to face. And we negotiated a couple. There was a couple of very close LBW calls, which went our way in the second last over. Craig stepped back and across to Danny Morrison. It was a pretty close call, but old New South Wales umpire Dick French said not out, which was funny. And then it got down to the last over, and I remember saying to myself, how did I get to be facing the last over, trying to save this test match against Richard, who with the wicket of Tony Dottermaid had equalled Ian Botham's world record. So he only needs Craig McDermott and me, and he's the new world record holder. The thing we had in our advantage, Chandris, is this. He'd bowled 30-something overs in the first innings, and he bowled 30-something overs in the second innings. And he was spent. But the greatness of Richard Hadlee was he was still charging in, trying as hard as he possibly could to bowl his side to a victory. And it would have been a great victory. And if they had have won, the series would have been 1-1, and they would have retained the Trans-Tasman Cup because they beat us over in New Zealand. So there was a lot going on out there at the time. And finally, in the last over, I played and missed one and let a couple go and got a Yorker. We just got that out and blocked the last 2 balls. And the whole atmosphere at the ground, Melbourne's a big ground, and there was still a lot of people there. It wasn't chock-a-block, but there was, I don't know, 30 or 40,000 people. every time I blocked it, mate, you couldn't hear. It was just so noisy. And then it'd just go, while he was walking back, he'd get to the end of his mark, Richard, and it'd go, total silence. And then I'd let one go and they'd go, yeah, just go again, because they all knew that I was a dodgy batsman and had never done anything with the bat. To Richard's credit, after that last delivery butt, the first thing he did was put his arm around me and tapped me on the helmet and said, mate, you've done a great thing for Australian cricket today. And that's when Ian Smith walked over and said the same thing. You've done a great thing for Australian cricket, Widow, and here's the ball. You've deserved it. So that was the story with the ball, which 28 years later I gave back to Richard, and as part of his collection now in Christchurch where he lives. We walked up into the race and Allan's face was just, mate, he hugged us. I can't remember if he said thank you, but in ways around, we just celebrated in the dressing room, and that was plenty of thank yous. And it was a great moment. You don't realise at the time what a pivotal moment that is in Australian cricket history, and for Allan Border and for Richard. I think Richard had to wait 6 months to go to Pakistan or something and get that wicket to become the new world record holder. So, yeah, look, it was, when you're in the moment, you're just sort of in that moment, and we've drawn the test and we've won the series 1-0. We've got the Trans-Tasman Cup. But as the years go on, there's all these little byplays and things that were going on within it. And, you know, Allan's captaincy. I don't know whether people were asking questions about his captaincy, but he needed to win a series, and he needed to win a series badly. And when you look back at it in history, it's fascinating that it started with me blocking out Sir Richard Hadlee. Unbelievable.
Then you grew from strength to strength, and you had 3 spells, 2 against West Indies in Test cricket and 1 against India at Perth. Was that the best phase between 88, 89 to 92, 93 that you played for Australia in Test cricket?
Yeah. I'd had a lot of knee problems, and I ended up having 9 knee operations. But from about 85, 6, I'd worked out a fitness regime that was perfect, and I never had an injury from about 86 through till when I retired. And when I got to the late 80s, I'd really happy with what I'd learned. You start to execute. You've been around 8 or 9 seasons now. You've played in some international cricket. I'd also played some one-day games. You're comfortable with what you're doing. You have a routine. You know how hard it is now. You've gone through the injuries and the pain, back injury. I broke my arm twice getting hit, you know, things like this. It's easy to shot it in, but I was just desperate to play cricket at the best level and test myself against the best level. So 89 came around and I'd had a really unbelievable season in 88, 89. I think I was the leading wicket taker in domestic cricket in Australia, and got picked for the last test in Adelaide on an absolute Adelaide belter. I mean, Dean Jones got 200 and Merv got 70 in our first innings. And I'm not going to say Merv smashed him around the ground. Merv actually got hit a few times with short balls, which was pretty funny looking at him in the shower with all the bruises later in the game. But we got a lot of runs, and this was the great West Indian attack, and that's how good the batting deck was. I ended up taking 7 for, and it was so different to the one in Perth. The 7 for in Adelaide started at the end of the second day, went all the third day, and finished on the start of the fourth day. I think 32 overs, 7 for 89. Years later, when I took the 7 for in Perth against India, that was 7 for 27 off 12 overs, like a spell and a half. So I'd had this one that had gone over 3 days and this other one that had gone over like a session. It was crazy. But the 7 for in Adelaide, because they had such a great side, they had Greenwich, Haynes, Viv, Richie Richardson, Carl Hooper, Gus Logie, Jeff Dujon. I mean, that was a top 7. To get a few of those guys out on a flat deck where the batting was it's never easy at test level, but it was in favour of the batting sides. Yeah, that was a really big moment for me, Chandresh. I really, after that, felt that, you know, I can mix it with these guys. And I used a lot of reverse swing in that test match, which in 84-5, Imran Khan had come out and played for New South Wales. And we asked him about it, and he told us everything about it. So at Sydney, where it was a turner, and in Adelaide, where it was a very flat wicket and the ball got roughed up real quickly, we implemented these reverse swing techniques by wetting the ball down and really shining it up, which they don't do these days, which I think is incredible. They sort of dry shine it. But I was bowling reverse swing in Adelaide, and that's why I took the 7-for. And thanks to Steve Waugh in the nets the day before, who said, if you bowl that, which I was bowling with an old ball in the nets, you bowl that out there tomorrow, you'll get wickets. I took 9 in the match.
And the India match as well in 92, and then West Indies as well in 92, you repeated that performance. So that phase was very good for you.
Very good phase. I was very comfortable with my life. I was happily married. Had a few other things going on outside of cricket. I had a cricket school and stuff like that. Everything was, it was sort of, I could probably say at the end of 88, 89, something like that, I was a professional cricketer. Everything that I was doing some after dinner speaking. I had the Mike Whitney School of Cricket. I was doing also some very top end coaching, playing for New South Wales, playing for my club Randwick. Mate, it was fantastic. I didn't have to seek employment from somewhere else where I didn't really want to go to work because I wanted to play cricket. So that from sort of, 88, 89, right through till 94 were definitely my best years. And it's really weird because I turned 30 in 1989, and usually you're coming off at that stage as a fast bowler, but I just sort of kept going and got a little bit better, and had an opportunity to play in the World Cup in 92 in Australia, which was, look, we didn't play too well in that World Cup, sadly, but to play in front of your home crowd in a World Cup was just a phenomenal experience. And as you said, I went to the West Indies and to Sri Lanka on tours, which I'd always wanted to go on a full tour with an Australian team too. So I would have liked to have played more Test cricket than 12 Tests, but I felt pretty satisfied when I was retired.
That 91-92 season, we in India remember watching you taking that catch that I spoke about and ending Sachin Tendulkar, and you did well in Perth, and then Sydney Test match, you were the 12th man. Now here's a story that you can corroborate. Ravi Shastri keeps telling all of us about the fact that you said, get back in the crease or I will break your head. And he said if you were good enough to be in the 11, then you wouldn't have a problem. What was that all about with Ravi Shastri?
Ravi got 200 in that game and batted beautifully. And Sachin, and I'd played in the first Test match in Brisbane, and then because it was a turning wicket in Sydney, we didn't want to take 3 quick bowlers in, and that was Shane Warne's debut game. So Ravi got 200 and Sachin got 148. Bruce Reid was picked in front of me and bowled like 4 overs and hurt his back. So as 12th man, I just chased leather for days when Ravi was just smashing him around the ground. Anyway, I was fielding it sort of shorts, just on square leg, and Ravi's just bunted one out there, and I've run in and picked the ball up and went, get back in that. And he was about 170 not out, mind you. Get back in that. I'll throw this, bust your head open and all this sort of stuff. And he went, Michael, if you could bat and bowl and field as well as you can talk, you wouldn't be the 12th man. Which is probably the kindest, most non-vindictive, but poignant sledge I've ever had given to me. Because most blokes say, I'm going to hit in there, or, I took your sister out for a date last night, whatever. Ravi just said, if you can bat and bowl as field as well as you can talk, you wouldn't be the 12th man, mate. You'd be in the team. So I just looked for a hole to sort of jump down then and try to disappear in the middle of the SCG. Yeah.
And, it's quite interesting because remember 92 World Cup, you were the most successful bowler for Australia in that World Cup. You did well later in the year against West Indies. You picked 7 wickets as well in a Test match later in the year. And then you got injured and you never played again for Australia. Why didn't that comeback happen? Because you were bowling well, just went out for injury, but never came back.
Yeah, I unfortunately I got a couple of injuries. I was playing a one-day game in Brisbane against the West Indies, and Ken Benjamin, who was another big West Indian quick, and when he bowled an in-swinging Yorker, and I just got the bottom of my bat on it, and it hit me on the foot. and it broke not my toe, but the bone that's connected in your foot to the second toe. It just smashed it. That took a long time to recover, and it sort of was never the same after that. I played out the end of that season. I started to want to play the season later, and I don't know whether it was because the angle of my foot had changed a little bit, but my knee injury came back. So I had to have another knee operation, and that pretty much was the end of my career. I just rolled out of, I tried to play, and, you know, that was my 9th knee operation. I was 34 and a half years of age. The body had, you know, fast bowling's a really difficult thing to do. Anybody who has bowled for a decade or more at that level, the wickets are really hard like concrete. It just takes a toll. I mean, if, like I say to the young fast bowlers at the club, Randwick Petersham, where I'm the president, if you're not up for the pain, you're not doing the right thing, because fast bowling is really painful. I mean, it's a beautiful thing just to run in and get that ball, just to kiss the wicket and the little nick, and, or, you know, swing one in and jag it away and execute. But there's a lot of pain involved. And if you're not up for the pain and the training and the rehabilitation, and I think at, you know, 34, going close to 35, my body had just had enough and went, I'm gone, you know.